Well, thank you everyone for coming. I'm Lisa Costello, Gallery Director here. I know most of you in the audience, but I'm not sure about who out there is in the crowd on Zoom. So this is being recorded and it's also on Zoom. And I think we've got it streaming on Facebook Live, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So I'm delighted to have Jenny Mendes speak today. She's really an amazing artist and was on the card and the cover of our catalog. And so I've been anxiously looking forward to hearing her speak. And I'd really like to thank all of our donors. I know I have a few in the audience here, and it's been really amazing to have all of your support. I also want to thank our administration for supporting the gallery, as well as all of my advisory board, and of course the art and design faculty. This show is amazing that it all came together during these times. And Chris Birdie, I really want to thank him for being such an amazing artist and faculty member and gallery supporter. He really came through with curating such a wonderful show. For those of you who haven't seen the show, it's really specifically about the figure in ceramic work, so both animal and figure and human. And so it's a wide variety in the gallery. So hopefully you've come out to see it. So Jenny Mendes is one of the 10 artists that is participating in the ceramics biennial this year. And she was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and she is a practicing studio artist. She sells her work quite regularly. It's hard to keep up with her inventory if you go and see that. She sells it on Etsy. And her work is inspired by nature and the figure. She received her BFA in ceramics from Washington University in St. Louis, and she continued her education at Penland School of Craft in North Carolina. And if you haven't heard of that, it's an amazing school that offers workshops, and you travel there. It's a little bit like Airmont School of Arts and Crafts or Haystack. It's just an amazing place to be. And she actually was a resident artist there for 3 years and taught there as well. She's participated in residencies and symposiums in Paris, Macedonia, Slovenia, Turkey, got a whole list here, Serbia, the Netherlands, the Philippines, Latvia, and Greece. So her artwork has taken her all over the world, and she's been able to share her amazing work with everyone. She has been a full-time studio artist for over 30 years, and she lives in Chesterland, Ohio. So without further ado, I'm going to let her take over.
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here and excited to give this presentation. I am doing it without my notes because we couldn't figure out how to separate them out. So I hope that the pace will be good and that I'll be coherent. As Lisa said, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I was born here. Hold on. Start my timer. I was born here and I've lived most of my life here, though I did go to school in St. Louis and I spent a bunch of time in North Carolina. I live in this little odd house that's on the outside of Cleveland. It was built from a lot of parts of mansions that were torn down in Cleveland. And when we were looking for a house, we found it. I had no idea that I'd be interested in the land that's around it. I was just really captivated by how oddly charming it is. And after I lived here for a while, I discovered that actually a potter had lived here. I found some shards here and there around the house. I originally put this picture in when I gave a similar presentation when I was in Greece, and I thought the snow would be exciting to people. But actually it looks like this right now. We've been dumped on by practically 2 feet of snow, and it's beautiful, but it's cold. Around my house is this little stream, so I'm in this kind of really interesting ecosystem where a lot of animals come. There's a lot of wild parts because there's wetlands, and there's a lot of really natural plant life. It's not a very manicured place. discovered my love of gardening here. I always was really interested in plants from a very young age. And I started gardening with my grandmother, and I was always really curious about the shapes of leaves before the flowers would begin. And since I've lived here, I've become quite an ardent gardener. Here's a picture of my house on the most beautiful spring day. And it was maybe one of the most perfect days I'd ever seen here. And then the next day, actually, there was a 100-year storm and everything flooded, even flooded in through the house, and everything was covered in mud. But it just kind of reminds me about ceramics, how there's birth and there's death, there's destruction and there's glory, and that's just the way it is. And we have to be ready for that at any time. Since the pandemic, I was spending a lot of time here, obviously, like everybody in their home. And I really had time to really look and see what was going on seasonally, because before I was always traveling for work. And last year I did a lot of photography that is inspirational in some of the designs I put on my work. One of the things I always try to do is approach what I'm doing with a very open heart, be open-minded, see what comes to me rather than what I already have a preconceived idea about. And generally just be in touch with myself and with nature. This is my dog. He's been segregated upstairs right now so he wouldn't bark and interrupt our presentation. And this is actually on my street, a park that had this beautiful wild primrose garden that I discovered accidentally one day. So all the seasons affect what I do, and every season and every time I'm always looking really intricately at what's happening, what's changing, looking close in, seeing the energy. And subconsciously, I'd say these forms come into my work. A spiral is something that's ever present: growth, roots, leaves, patterns. All these things, to me, bring a lot more content to the surface decoration that I'm doing. And like catching the perfect time, the perfect golden light, I try to find that kind of energy in my work. And it's not always easy because you have to be really attentive, but sometimes I get lucky and I do it. So beginning with ceramics, the piece on the right is one of the first ceramic things I ever did in 7th grade. And on the left, a recreation of that when I was in college. I wasn't particularly interested in ceramics. I went to art school and I thought that I was going to be into painting because that was what I was really interested in. But I had a friend who coerced me into taking a ceramic class, and then he promptly dropped the class. But I stayed at it from my, I'd say, second semester freshman year. So here are two of my earliest pieces, trying to learn how to throw, absolutely having no skills. But you can see on the right, that pattern came into my work from the very beginning. I remember a slide presentation I saw of some early Native American work, and I saw that the painting they did on the pieces sometimes really graphic and sometimes more decorative. And I realized, oh, I could do that too. So early on in my exploration of clay, I was thinking about surface decoration. And I was really attracted to the monochromatic tones, the natural clay colors, and the pattern. After Washington University, I went to Penland School of Crafts, like Lisa said. And actually, I'm going to be teaching there this spring for the spring concentration. So when I finished school, I heard about Penland, and this was before the internet, if you can believe it, that ever existed. And somebody told me, oh, Penland School, it's this amazing place. And somehow I got it into my consciousness that I needed to go there, and I figured out how to get there. And I came for a 2-month concentration, the same kind that I'm going to be teaching now. And it was just the most exciting time for me. It didn't even matter who was teaching. I just had this 2-month period of time to focus on my work, kind of go deep into myself. And that's what I did. And then I was invited back there a year later as they call it the core program, but it was like a special scholarship. And I lived there for 2 years in my early 20s, and I took all kinds of classes, and I helped working with running the school. and I just did ceramics. After that time, I got a job working on the art train, which was a traveling art museum, and it went through Michigan and all over the country. And at this time, I started focusing a little bit more specifically on pattern in my work in design, but I still was mostly just doing sculpture and very simple black, white, and red. And I did that for a while, and then I got married and I was trying to figure out my life, and like a lot of people, it was confusing. I really didn't know how to transition from, college to whatever was going to come next. So I had some jobs that were not particularly inspiring to me. And then I was doing ceramics all along because I always had this really deep connection to friends and the craft community, but I couldn't figure out how I could make it work for myself. And but I was sort of starting, and I broke my leg and I was stuck in the house for about 2 or 3 months and I couldn't do anything. And I started working on some old pieces that I had around, and I got more into the surface of the pieces. So it became more figurative. I was always working with the figurative, but I started getting more detailed because I had more time. And at this time also, I was beginning to work a little bit with galleries and trying to wholesale my work, but I didn't do anything that was particularly very traditional. So I didn't understand how I could fit in, but I always had a strong focus on doing it my way. So I somehow found a little niche where I had found a few galleries that liked my work, and I just went forward from there. Over time, I would say because I was trying to sell my work and with galleries, I got a little bit more commercial in terms of what I was making. I did series of cups. These are cups with 2 faces and a face on each side. And I'm using terra sigillata and underglaze on these. These are all low fire for you ceramics people. And I would work in series, and that way I kind of developed my painting skills. I understood the materials. I was able to get a little bit deeper into what I was doing, but still kind of keeping it my own style, I would say. These are small little figures. The one on the left was part of a salt and pepper shaker set, and the right was just a little sculpture. Here I was influenced on the right by some Aboriginal painting. The bottom, I was looking at different mark making, and on the left, just my simple painting. I fully acknowledge that my work comes on the back of history, and I'm inspired by historical ceramics, but I always try to bring it through to my own personal lens. A teapot, kind of in a non-traditional form. I would say this was probably in the 90s, maybe, that I did this, when teapots were all the rage. And, I continued along that vein for a while. And then I got a grant from the state of Ohio, which allowed me to apply for a residency in California, which I didn't get. And I really wanted it. I wanted to change because I didn't like my job, what I was doing, and make money. And so I applied to Penland School of Craft for a residency, and I didn't really think I'd get it because I thought I was too far along in my career and too old. I was like in my early 40s at the time, but they offered me the residency, and I had this like reckoning with myself, like, could I do this? Could I not do it? Can I take time off from my life? But I just thought, well, if it doesn't work, I don't have to stay for 3 years. They wanted this big commitment. I didn't see how I could do it. But I did it, and the 3 years went like a flash, and it was amazing time period. So while I was there at this time, I continued what I was doing, but I decided to take more time with the different pieces. I would fire these pieces 3-4 times until I got it right. These are tiles, and I did them sort of in a printmaking technique. I would carve into the clay, and then I would put black over it so it would get into the little cracks. And then I would just work it like a painter, until it became right for me. I worked with different subject matter. A lot of my work is very intuitive, and I just start working and I allow whatever it is to come to me. And I did also some sculptural work at that time. These pieces are maybe like a foot and a half, something like that. My scale's also always been really small, but I tried to take it up a little bit here. This is a set of salt and pepper shakers. Because I was always doing this work with galleries in a more commercial kind of way, I tried to make forms that other people could understand, even though they're not very practical and not very functional. Particularly if people would understand, oh, this is salt and pepper, it gave them a framework, and it made my work more accessible to them or understandable. This is a piece I did at Penland. It probably took me a week to paint all the dots on this. Once I got started, this was another piece that was inspired by Aboriginal painting. And once I got started on this, I felt like I had to continue, even though it took forever to get it finished. But I love the final effect. Two, I don't know if they're harpies or bird human kind of forms. I've always liked combining animal and human elements together. Just for me, it seems right. I know for some people it is a weird, but for me, it's good. Kind of a loon. I've also done a whole big series of masks in ceramics. These were larger pieces, bigger than my head, and formed solidly and carved out. And then I've also done a lot of small ones lately that I can work through a lot quicker. Along with my gallery work, I would say, or work that I sell online, are hundreds or probably thousands at this point of little plates and bowls. The left is a bowl and the right is a plate. It's all low fire work, and everyone has a unique design. One of the things I've realized about my work is that I make it without an intention, but oftentimes it finds the right owner and speaks something very specific to them, and possibly has nothing to do with my original intention, but it kind of completes the circle of the making. And I love the fact that people find these images and they take them into their lives and they become very meaningful for them. Lisa talked about the residencies that I've done. I've been extremely fortunate in that I've been invited to a lot of different residencies, which is exciting. I love to travel, and I love to travel with a purpose. This is Lake Bled in Slovenia. And one opportunity led to what's now become about 10 different residencies, I would say, at this point. And it was just saying yes to something I had no idea about. I didn't know the people. I didn't know what it would mean, but I just became open to the possibility. And it's something that once I did it one time, I realized how valuable it was for myself and how I wanted to continue to do this. So Lisa said, yeah, you've had a lot of opportunities to do this, but partially it's been driven by me wanting to do it and by pursuing different avenues when even a little door opened. This was in Slovenia. We got to use some clay that has calcite in it, and it can be fired vitreous in 1 hour in an open fire. So that was kind of fun and exciting. The clay, I think it comes from a technique that was done in Serbia. And the top of this head, you can see are little stones, which is the calcite that they crush and put into the clay. And you can also put it in the clay. And because the clay is able to accept it, they don't crack out when you fire it. This is from a residency I did in the Netherlands that was based on the theme of Hieronymus Bosch. And I loved the way that light affected what I was doing there. The light is so different from how it is here, and it had a big effect on me. Also, this was taken in a farmer's field behind where we were working, just as the golden light hit the field. That was probably about a 1 minute time period, and a photographer caught this. At the same time, in the Netherlands, this is a kiln in Latvia, and it's a Nambora Gama wood fire kiln. And I had a chance to fire with these people 2 different times. I was supposed to be back, but the pandemic canceled it. And I love firing with wood, and I like using different clays. So working in Latvia, I was able to work with a clay that had a lot of big chunky grog in it, and my pieces got bigger, and I explored things that I don't normally have a chance or take the time to do at home, with a lot less surface decoration. This symposium took place in I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately, but in this very cool old manor that a young couple bought for a little bit of money and have been renovating it as a multi-use venue. And I created these pieces for floral displays. Here you can see a piece on the right, unfired, on the left, fired. The first time we fired the kiln, they had no idea what they were doing, and it wasn't super. But the second time, it was led by somebody that was really strong with wood firing, and we had a great firing. Talking about travel or putting yourself in a different situation, not understanding a language when you're in a foreign country makes me, at least, be very alert to everything, including my own work. You know, you really have to pay attention, and I discovered that the more I pay attention, the deeper I can go into a subject matter. Some examples of some of the wood-fired works that I've done. This is a collection over time. I like to use my painting techniques in a wood kiln, and you know, when it works great. Unfortunately, with wood firing, you don't know what's going to happen, and you can get a lot of ash, and it can destroy a lot of what I've done. But I keep trying anyway, even though a lot of times it feels a little bit frustrating because it's so satisfying when it works. This is still an unfired piece in Latvia. I was inspired by the deer because at night they had these certain kind of deer, I don't know what they were called, but they would moan in the dark, and it was super mysterious and eerie and kind of magical, and it got me to want to make a deer myself. At another symposium I was at, the theme was light, and everything that all the participants did was to be pieces in the same manner that could light up the place. And it was really exciting for me to do this because it was a perspective that I hadn't generally looked into in my work, and just shifting the theme made me think about light in all different ways, and I had some really interesting things that I came up with. These pieces weren't fired because, although I like them in black and white, at the time the kiln wasn't finished, so we weren't able to fire them. But I like that I took the light inside the figure and on the outside, and I used the style, my style that I usually use, but I upped the scale of it. When I've worked in these different countries, I always leave my work there, and that's always also a very refreshing thing for me, to not have ownership of it, to leave it where I make it, to not be tied to it financially, because, you know, when I'm at home selling my work, I always have this sort of thing in the back of my mind, you know, can I sell it? Can I sell it? Is it feasible to sell? But when I'm away from that situation, I feel really free, and I just make whatever I want to make. And, you know, hopefully someday I'll be able to do that all the time. But now it's not something that I can do. This piece was modeled on the woman of the house, who was this beautiful, tall, statuesque woman. So I used her as my inspiration. And this is the final grouping of pieces I did over the 2-week time period during the symposium. Back in my studio, I mostly use an electric kiln, and I use underglaze, and I use terra sigillata that I've made. And I have many, many different colors that I've created over the years. takes time for me to figure out how they work. Some are hits and some are misses. I create them. I'm not a very technical person, and I create them much the way a person cooks, by taste. So I'm always adding a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And when they're fired, they look more like this, warmer, richer, deeper. But I can see the way they look when I'm painting with them. So it's a little bit of surprise in the end, but more or less what I'm expecting. The reason I like to use Terra Sigillata is because it feels really good to touch. It's sensuous. And I started off making pottery. My first ceramic classes were in the ceramic studio, and everybody was making pots. And so my orientation is something in the hand, something that feels good, something sort of scaled to my own body. This is a plate. It's unfired. I actually prefer to have my works in a mat, but of course, when you're making something that is vaguely functional, you need to put a glaze over it. So when the glaze comes on, it changes, it brightens it, and different levels of the color come out, but still looks okay to me. It's another detail of a plate. Layers, underglaze, and Terra Sigillata in this. I use a very fine brush. It's like a 0/18, and that's how I do most of the fine brush work. It's a liner brush, which holds the material, the paint or whatever. It's not specifically for ceramics, but after years and years, I figured out that worked best for me. Here I am in my studio, which is actually quite small, but somehow I make it work. I have a wall that's got all the colors on it and 2 tables, and I also share it with my laundry. So, when somebody says, oh, I'm not working because I don't have a studio. Well, honestly, you don't need much of a studio to work. I mean, it's great to have a lot of space. It was wonderful for me when I went to Penland because I got to move into a much bigger space, but anything can work. A lot of times I travel and I bring work with me. So I've kind of modified what I make to be flexible and being able to work in different locations. This is a little monkey I made during my Penland residency, which I kept because I loved it. Section of a figure. Here's my wall of colors. I try to be organized. Actually, I'm not that organized, in truth. My husband created these little test swatches, sort of like paint swatches, which is really helpful when I try to figure out what I'm doing. I can kind of take one off and match it to another one and see if it's a good combination. But in truth, left to my own devices, I'm not that organized, and I'm more a little bit hit or miss. But I appreciate that somebody else tried to get me organized. This is just underglaze, black and white, interior shot of a large bowl that I did. And here you can see my view. This little room, my studio, had a wall where the window was, and when we bought the house, it was a little bit moving, and they said, oh, no problem, it's good, no problem. And then we realized there was no foundation. Somebody had built onto the house with no foundation, basically. And so when we renovated it, we were able to recycle this window that somebody was throwing out. So it's a huge window, and I look out, and I can always see what's going on. So even though I'm in a tiny room, I feel like I'm in this big space. This is an example of some shot glasses I made for New Orleans Jazz Festival. It's a show that I used to do when I was traveling and doing shows. For the last 2 years, unfortunately, I've pretty much just been selling online. Pretty much everything I was supposed to do was canceled. It's, on the one hand, has been disappointing, like for everybody. Fortunately, I've been healthy. And on the other hand, it brought me back into myself. I live in a beautiful place, so I had no complaints about where I was. I don't mind. I wouldn't say that I'm an introvert, but I don't mind being by myself. I can work for hours and hours at a time and not feel lonely. One of the greatest things that I learned when I was in school, I would say, was my teacher, who wasn't a great artistic teacher for me, but he said, go into the studio every day and just be there, no matter what you're doing. You know, if you're just thinking, if you're sitting, if you're writing, if you're working, develop a practice. And that's something I brought into my own professional practice, that I try to work every day if I can. I mean, I love to work, so it's not torture, but even when I don't want to, I try to get in there, try to start doing something. And even if it feels a little shaky at first, if I keep with it, if I kind of push myself through the period where I don't want to be there, I can always get to somewhere positive and good for myself. I love making tiny things. I know it's not particularly practical, but it's really suits my personality. Sometimes I've gotten really into color lately, but sometimes I try to bring it back a little bit and just work in black and white. Originally, when I worked in black and white, it was easy to see what I was doing. You know, design is just more specific and focused when you're not confusing yourself with lots of colors. So sometimes I try to dial it back, give myself different parameters, and then see what I can do with what I have. The border of this plate is from an embroidery pattern that I saw when I was visiting Ukraine. I like to bring what I'm seeing and what I'm traveling and what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking about into my work at any given time. These were some plant patterns that I saw when I was visiting my brother-in-law in Sri Lanka. I feel like it's so important for me as an artist to get outside of myself and see the world outside of my small little space here. So that's one of the reasons that I love to travel. It's always exhilarating and inspiring. Even though I work on a lot of small pieces, sometimes I take the time to work in a bigger piece, and I always come up with a much more intricate and deeper narrative. So this is a bigger bowl. A lot of the bowls I do are pinch pots, but this is a larger bowl. And this is a tiny one. This is just in there randomly. Checking the time here. This is from the wood firing in Latvia. This piece was underfired. The whole kiln was underfired, but somehow it came out perfectly. And that's the thing about ceramics. It always surprises you. My old studio companion, who's no longer with me, but still in my slideshow. Salt and pepper shaker set. I don't know why, but I've always intuitively worked on these simple female forms. It's something I never get tired of, and I'm sure I got it originally from seeing antiquities, but it's always really exciting for me to go like where I was in Greece this summer and see all these old ceramics and see how these basic forms are from the beginning of time. And I'm right there with it. I can do something much more sophisticated, but I like these simple forms. And it also gives me an opportunity to do a much more intricate surface. When the form is simple, if the form is beautiful, it doesn't need decoration. But when the form is incredibly simple, I can do something a lot more fun with the surface treatment. A covered jar with faces on both sides. And a series of little bird vases that I've been working on for years. And a little game I always play with myself is like, how many different patterns can I find? It just keeps doing the same form interesting. And I still work on animals as well as basically functional forms. Lots of layering. I like to think sometimes that I'm doing a watercolor on the surface. And where do my ideas come from? Honestly, I don't even know myself. I just sort of get into a zone and let it fly. I guess I have a special talent to not want to do the same thing over and over again and dig deeper and deeper. Here's a progression of how a piece would start and come about. So sometimes I use pencil, sometimes I don't. In this case, I did because it's a bigger platter. Started with an outline, filling in colors, trying to find balance in the design. And then I'll add more details so it's a little bit deeper of a narrative. Sometimes I get really frustrated. I don't know where it's going, but if I keep at it, I can find some sort of point of balance in the piece. I almost never destroy anything. I just keep working it until I get it right. Even on a small piece, I do the same thing. Layer upon layer, refiring. These are some of the little masks I was talking about earlier that I've been working on. It's fun for me to have a simple form and just keep going over and over with it. It's just, I know some people like word puzzles, crossword puzzles. I guess this is my puzzle. Use the same materials and just always have a new outcome. This is fired in an electric kiln with terra sigillata, but using some different washes that make the electric firing look like an atmospheric firing. And a few pieces from last winter. So during the pandemic, I realized I was here, I wasn't traveling as much, and I could take more time on individual pieces. And so that is exactly what I did. And that's what you're seeing in the show there of those platters. They're much bigger scale. These are all about the same scale as the pieces in the show. And this was the one I started with, actually. And I probably spent about a week painting each one. Something I never would have done before, but because I had the time and we weren't leaving the house, I gave myself this opportunity. And I was really excited what came out of it. This one, unfortunately, I worked too hard on, and when I fired it, all the glaze chipped off. But I have this picture, which is better than nothing. I don't know always where things are coming from, but after the fact, a lot of times I see that I kind of tap into my subconscious archetypes, I would say. But when I'm doing it, I don't have this awareness. I like to just be really free and associational, and then after the fact, kind of figure it out. This one I painted right as spring was blooming. I censored this with the flower for Instagram, so that is actually a little flower. But this was right when spring was blooming last year. I know I'm kind of running out of maybe time here. Well, maybe not. So, but I'm speeding up a little. Centeredness, communication. Also looking at some iconic old pictures. These are little toothpick holders. Sometimes I just do stuff for fun. I mean, all that's fun for me, really. I think if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't be doing it. This was last winter and just trying to scale it back on the color and thinking about snow and patterning. 2 chalices designed for a show a few years ago. Some figurative candle holders. I've done a lot of tiles, not recently, but I like working flat. And I like the colors of nature entering into my work. I like to think about those combinations much better than anything I could think of myself. 2 rabbits kind of holding the cosmos in their surface. My messy studio table, everything really cluttered and close together. That's the way I like to work. And I also really always like being surprised by what I do. It's one of the joys of being an artist, I guess. Last year, for a spring show, I made these little bird dishes. It was kind of a combination of the painting I'd been doing in form and nature. And lastly, during the pandemic, I started to do a lot of watercolor painting that just kind of helped soothe the situation for myself. And I realized that I've taken my ceramic painting skills and I brought them into the watercolor, and then it goes back and forth. In a way, even though I don't sketch for my work, in developing these different paintings, I can see their themes and ideas that I could also bring back to the ceramics, although each would stand on their own. All different subject matter. This came about during the time when the comet was passing through. This was in response to a friend and his ultra sensitivity about the world. This painting I made right before my father died last year, and I didn't know he was going to die because he suddenly died, although he wasn't in good health, but it almost was a premonition that it was coming. It happened just the week before. I use my work and painting for all kinds of different reasons, to understand myself, to understand the world, to explore, to play, basically just to feel alive. This piece was in response to the photography project I was doing, where I got so excited with leaves and colors and playing with them that I accidentally played with poison sumac and completely got covered in that. But still, something good came of it after I recovered. Just being in touch with myself is a lot of what my work is about. Trying to be sensitive to all aspects and feel and see. And lastly, I started using gold. I haven't really used gold in my ceramics, but I love using gold in my paintings. It's hard to photograph, but I feel like it's light, and I understand why people used to use it, because it adds some kind of brilliance to the work. So, in closing, I would say my work is about being true to myself, not necessarily about what the art world in general is doing. And I encourage all of you to try to get close to that point in yourselves, whatever it is. Nobody can figure that out for you but yourself. But if you have some kind of inner vision, or you are willing to try to find it, and you work with it and you pursue it, it can be really gratifying and really exciting. And you never know what's going to come of it. Here you can see the breadth of my studio, and my dog, who's cloistered upstairs to not interrupt our session here. When I can, I work outside too, because I live in such a beautiful place. The end. So I will happily take your questions now. But I can't hear.
Let's see if we have any questions. Cindy, do we have any questions from the audience? Does anybody here have any questions? I have a question, and maybe some people can think of things as the lights come on. I was curious about, with the patterning and the design that you use in your work, you seem to have like a relieved symmetry that comes up, and what inspires that? Like, I see, the figure, of course, is symmetrical if you cut it down the middle, but then you just like perfectly just slightly turn the head or make it so that it's not so formal. Is that something that you're conscious of or struggle with or embrace, or how does that work with your imagery?
I like symmetry. I always like symmetry. Even when I was a little kid, I remember I used to decorate the salad at night, and I would like cut all the pieces and put them around like a mandala. I think that it's just something that, excuse me, feels really good to me. I mean, I don't want it to be so symmetric that it's equal on both sides, but I like a sense of centeredness. I like that there's a point I can focus on. It's how I guess, structure what I do. It's not complete. I wouldn't say it's unconscious, but it's not conscious, heavily conscious either. It's just what feels right for me, I would say.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that came from some of the historical pottery that you showed has that too, which is so wonderful.
I think I think a lot of artists try to find some kind of balance that works for them. And, I'm not that different than somebody that lived 3,000 years ago. When I was in Greece last summer, I went to the Museum of Anthropology or Archaeology or something, and I looked at their ceramics, and they're amazing. And some of the designs are as contemporary as anything that somebody's doing today. It's like, I think these different kinds of symmetries are sort of innate in us. And when you kind of release yourself to your subconscious, they just come out naturally. Well, at least for me, anyway.
Yeah, great. It looks like, you had a question?
So I'm like new to ceramics, but like when you're painting on the plates, is that just the underglaze or do you put like a glossy glaze over it?
Yes. On the plate, most of what I showed didn't have glaze over it just because it doesn't photograph that well, but it's layers of underglaze. And then sometimes I use terrasigillata, which if you don't know what that word is, it's just like a thin colored slip, basically. It's just something that I make. So some of it is stuff I buy and some of it's stuff I make with mason stains, and that makes the colors.
Great. Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, Jenny, there was a compelling idea. I'm trying to get the phrase and correct me what the phrase was. It was.
Can you repeat that? I can't hear him.
I'm not asking the question.
Do you want to come down here because it's hard to hear you with the mask on?
Sure.
I can't hear.
Yeah, he's gonna come down here so you can hear.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
the microphone.
So the question is,
Much better.
compelling idea. You make something, and it reaches somebody enough where it will spend money and they want to own it, live with it. But the idea was, the way you phrased it was, and this was kind of very compelling to me, the work itself looking for or searching for the right owner.
Well, I didn't know that when I started, honestly, and I don't know it when I'm doing it, but it happens to me time and time and time again. And so I really feel that. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No, yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is, the work, looking or searching for the right owner. It's a compelling idea because it's almost as if, the work is looking up at the viewer, and the person might buy it. I mean, it's happened to me countless times, right? So, but and there's a whole thing, obviously, like art reaches people on different levels, and the way you described it, people see things that you don't see, and it reaches them. But the way you phrased it was compelling. Where, what did I say? The way
you said the work is looking for something like
the work is like looking and communicating with them.
the future, the future, really.
Yeah. And it's almost like looking back on the person. It's looking for someone to like own it or live with it. And so it's like, it's almost like when you said that, I think of myself being the artwork talking to the person, which it's just an interesting way of phrasing it. That's all. It was compelling.
Oh, well, I would say that in the beginning, I just made it and I didn't think that at all. But I've been doing this and selling, and I never thought I would sell anything. I mean, I have tons of stuff I made when I was younger. I never would have sold anything, but at some point I thought, well, what can I do? Actually, I went to a psychic in my early 20s, and I had some horrible job at the time. And she told me something like, not that I believe in psychics, but she said, you'll be an artist and you'll do okay. Like, you won't be super famous, but you'll do something with it. And that's what you're supposed to do. And I don't know if it propelled me into it or not, but I never thought that I could sell my work. I just thought my earlier work, which I didn't show, was much rougher and probably I could have. I just never thought about it. And then when I started doing it, and I started doing it for years, and people would come back and they would tell me things about it, I realized there was this aspect to it. But not that I was making it with the intention of it finding somebody, but that when it found the right person, it was completed, actually. It was really complete. And I could tell you so many different stories, but a compelling one that happened a few years ago was I was in Minnesota doing the St. Croix pottery tour. And Sunday morning was the last day, and this woman, it hadn't really opened yet, and this woman came up and she was looking. And my work it only suits a certain kind of people. I mean, some people it's not going to mean anything to, but for some people it's a really intimate communication. And this woman was looking, and she held this plate and she was holding it, and then she came and she said, I really want to get this. My son had a tattoo like this on whatever the piece was, and then she told me a whole kind of sad story about his recent suicide, but which was sad, obviously horrible that that had been what happened to him. But I really loved that this piece could bring her some kind of solace. And another person once told me they bought something, they were doing some kind of yoga, and it was a piece with a foot in it, and she said, I'm working on this part of my body, and this is like giving me insight into that. So for me, that element of the other person is mysterious and really powerful. And it makes me feel like what I'm doing is more than just me doing it. It's just going out into the world and having and helping in some way.
So you answered my question, and the part that I really dug was, you said, like, after you make this thing, it reaches somebody, they own this, and somehow there's a completeness kind of in the cycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's beautiful. Thank you.
Let's see, I have another question. Yes?
When you're speaking of that, on how a piece will speak to a certain person and the right one, there was a piece that I saw in there of one of your tumblers with the hands in front of the eyes. Is that for sale?
Probably not. One of the tumblers? It's probably sold. It's probably all sold. But just not to make a commercial for myself, but I sell on Etsy. I put new work on there all the time. You can just Google my name and you can find my site, and you can look at things. I mean, not to buy, you can just look anyway and just see what's up there, but it's changing all the time.
But you were spot on when you said that, how it speaks to a person. All of your pieces mean something to me. I see so much in it, but then there's that one piece that's like, I want to reach up and just grab it and say,
Great.
Well, that's nice to hear.
Oh, let's see. I have a couple of questions, or a question on the chat. And it's Catherine, and she says, do you make the slip itself for Terra Siglata? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And if so, how?
Well, it's not very difficult to do. There's a million recipes on the internet, but basically you get a certain kind of clay, powdered clay. I use XX Sagar, or I use Red Art, and you deflocculate it, you float it in water, and then you let it sit overnight, and then water rises to the top, the heavy clay particles rise to the bottom, and the middle section you siphon out. And then I take that middle section and I either use it raw, like with the Red Art, or I add colorants to it, as in all the different colors, and then I use that to paint with. If you're really curious and you can't find a source, you can write to me through my website and I'll direct you if you're interested in doing that. So I'm happy to respond to any other questions. There's a contact thing on my website, which is just my name, jennymendes.com.
Great.
But making terra sigillata is not complicated at all.
Great, thank you. Let me see, I think, oh, okay. Will any low fire clay work? It's from a ceramics person.
Well, to make terra sigillata?
I guess. When did that pop up just now, Cindy? Yeah, I believe so.
You don't necessarily want to use the clay. You want to use the raw material. Might work better. So I use the powdered clay that I buy that doesn't have a lot of other stuff in it. When you have your own clay, like if you just took your clay and you made it into a slip, it's got some other stuff in that. I mean, you can try it. You know, one of the things I always say, especially when I'm teaching, is you should try it and see if it works. But the thing about terra sigillata is you want the finest particles. And if you're starting with like a block of clay, it's got a lot of other stuff in it, and it might be a lot more difficult to get to that very fine level. On the other hand, you know, it's basically what Native Americans used, and they would make it and they would dig their clay out of, you know, the hill or something like that. So the idea is to get the most fine particles of the clay suspended in water. I think people do it with porcelain sometimes, just the straight porcelain clay. So I'd say give it a try, but it would be easier if you didn't start with your clay that you're using.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Yes?
Could you elaborate a little bit about the archetype and how it kind of like inform your work or like arise and, you know, kind of move you or change you? The archetype that arise.
Oh, the archetype? Okay.
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear her.
Well,
No, Lisa, can you repeat the question? I can't hear through the
I
mask.
don't know if I could repeat that exactly, but do you want to come down here and say it again, or just repeat it for me?
Well, just kind of like how the archetype arrive in your work.
How does the archetype arrive in your work,
Yeah.
and anything?
And how it kind of inspire or change you.
And how it inspires or changed you?
Well, I think much in the same way that we dream in archetypes sometimes. When I just clear my mind and let things flow out, a lot of times it's really like a natural connection to my psyche. It comes out like that. How it's changed me is I've become a lot more conscious about what I'm doing after the fact, because I can see that it's connecting to something a lot bigger than myself. And I think when I originally began my ceramic work, and for a long, long time, I was extremely unconscious in my approach. I'm still very, very intuitive, but with another level of consciousness now, I would say. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Did that, yeah. Yes, it did. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? All right, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was really wonderful to have you and have your artwork in the exhibit. So thank you so much.